The phone vibrated just before 4 a.m. I woke up instantly. At my age, no one calls at that hour unless something is wrong. On the other end was my son's voice, urgent, frantic. He said they were being held at a hotel. There was a manager. There were police. Someone was demanding that the situation be resolved immediately in the middle of the night. He didn't say what had happened. He just kept repeating one thing. I had to transfer the money right now. If I didn't, everything would get worse. Much worse. I asked what was going on. He didn't answer. His voice trembled, caught between fear and pressure. I sat still in the dark, listening to his uneven breathing. I realized this felt very familiar. It wasn't the first time he had called like this. But this time, something felt different. My name is Ruth Allen. I am 73 years old. My husband passed away a long time ago. I live alone in a small, quiet apartment. I'm not very tech-savvy. I prefer not to bother people, and I live simply, often saying that I'm fine. Maybe that's why people think I'm weak. But being old doesn't mean being fragile. I've just been silent for too long. If you're listening to this story, you or your parents may have been in a very similar situation. Here, we share stories about family, respect, and the value of older people. If you'd like to stay and listen with us, please subscribe to the channel. He didn't stop. After a few seconds of silence, my son spoke again, faster and more urgently. He said his wife was standing next to him, crying, not knowing what to do. He said everyone around them was watching, the front desk staff as well as people in the lobby. Everyone knew they were in trouble. He said it was humiliating. He said if word got out by morning, he would never be able to show his face at work again. Then he brought me into it. Mom can always help. Mom has helped before. This time is no different. He said he wasn't asking casually. This was a real emergency. He said a mother couldn't abandon her child at a moment like this. I didn't answer right away. I sat on the bed, leaning against the old wooden headboard. The bedside lamp cast a weak yellow light, just enough to see the scuff marks on the wall. The clock across the room ticked steadily. Each sound felt louder at night. Outside the window, a car passed by, then faded into the distance. The city was still awake, only I seemed to be stuck in this moment. My son kept talking. He explained things in his own way. They hadn't been reckless. It was all just a misunderstanding. If it wasn't resolved immediately, the police would make it a bigger issue. He believed he was right. He believed that as long as I sent the money, everything would be fine, just like before. I listened and recognized that familiar feeling. The feeling of being pushed into a tiny corner, the feeling of having to make a decision quickly without giving it much thought. I had heard these words many times before, only the circumstances had changed. Once it was a car breaking down on the highway. Another time it was a contract falling through. Another time it was an opportunity that couldn't be missed. Every time it was urgent. Every time all it took was a little help from Mom. I remembered how I had paid in silence, without asking many questions, without complaining. I had woken up in the middle of the night, sat at the kitchen table, transferred the money, and only then let myself breathe. I used to think that as long as my child was okay, I was okay too. On the other end of the line, he paused, then lowered his voice. It softened, almost pleading. He said I was the only person he could rely on at the moment. He said I understood him. I gripped the phone tightly. I wasn't angry, I wasn't surprised either, I was just tired. A deep kind of exhaustion, not from the late hour, but from knowing that if I said yes, everything would repeat exactly as before. And this time, I wasn't sure I could endure it again. While my son was still speaking on the other end of the line, old images began to surface, out of order, but vivid. They didn't rush in all at once. They came slowly, one scene at a time, as if I were forcing myself to look back. The first scene was his wedding. I remembered the large hall with its high ceiling, bright lights, and tables covered in white cloth. Flowers were everywhere. Everyone was dressed up. I I stood at the edge of the room, holding a small purse, watching people walk by, laughing and talking. My son looked handsome. My daughter-in-law was radiant. Everyone said the reception was elegant, unforgettable. Someone turned to me and said how lucky I was. I smiled. When they asked if I was tired, I said I was fine. When they asked if it had been hard, I said it was manageable. I stood there, watching them dance, thinking that as long as my child was happy, everything was worth it. The next scene was the call about buying a house. He called one afternoon, his voice full of excitement, saying they had found the right place. The location was perfect. If they didn't decide immediately, someone else would take it. He said it was a rare opportunity. He said the future of his little family depended on it. I asked about the bank. He said the bank needed more. I was silent for a few seconds. Then I said okay again. I said I'd see if I could manage something. After hanging up, I sat alone at the kitchen table, took out paper and a pen and started calculating. I thought to myself that I was older, that living simply was fine. He was building a life. If I could help, I should. The third scene wasn't as clear as the first two. It was a series of small moments stitched together, urgent calls, short messages, familiar openings. "Mom, it's urgent. Just this once. It'll be fine." Sometimes it was a broken car. Sometimes it was work trouble. Sometimes it was unexpected expenses. I don't remember every detail. I just remember the feeling, the pressure to react quickly, to decide immediately, to say yes before having time to think. Throughout those years, my life changed very little. I used things as long as they still worked. I repaired instead of replacing. I didn't travel far. I didn't buy anything for myself unless it was truly necessary. I got used to saying that I was fine, that I didn't need anything. My son's life was different. He was busy. He traveled. He always had new plans. I never asked much. I just thought his generation was different, that he lived differently from me. Now, sitting in the night, listening to his voice again, I realized that what weighed on me wasn't the money. It was the fact that for 15 years, I had always been the one who said it was okay, who said it was fine, who said Mom was all right. And not once did anyone ask me whether I truly was. Amid the rapid stream of explanations, I realized something very clearly. He never asked where I was. He didn't ask if I was tired. He didn't ask whether I was frightened to be woken in the middle of the night. Every sentence circled back to one point. Had the money been transferred yet? Mom, please do it quickly. I stayed silent longer than usual. On the other end of the line, my son began to grow impatient. He kept calling my name, as if afraid I might disappear. I could hear his shallow breathing, hear the real panic in it. I knew he was scared. I also knew he believed I would do what I always did. I looked down at my hands. My fingers were no longer as steady as they once were. I thought of all the times I had said yes without hesitation. This time, I took a deep breath, not to gather courage, but to make sure I could hear myself clearly. When I spoke, my voice was slow and even. "You need to handle it yourself." On the other end, it was as if all sound stopped. There was no immediate response. I didn't wait. I didn't explain further. I didn't apologize. I pressed the button and ended the call. I set the phone down on the table beside the bed and sat still in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. There was only a hollow feeling spreading very slowly, as if a cord that had been stretched tight for years had finally been cut. It didn't hurt right away. It just felt lighter in an extraordinary way. I woke up when the morning was already bright. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, falling onto the floor in long, familiar streaks. Nothing felt different from any other morning. There was no unusual noise, no sign that the night before had been extraordinary. I walked into the kitchen, boiled water, made coffee. The smell of hot coffee spread slowly, filling the small room. I sliced a piece of bread and put it in the toaster. I sat down in the familiar chair, in the same spot where I sat every day. I took a sip of coffee. Everything tasted the same as always. Outside the window, traffic moved steadily. A neighbor walked by with a dog. A normal morning. The world kept going, not waiting for anyone, not collapsing because of my decision. When I picked up my phone, the screen lit up with missed calls and messages. I didn't need to open them to know who they were from. My hand trembled slightly. A wave of anxiety rose quickly. I thought about calling back, about saying I was sorry, that I would think about it again, that I just needed a little more time. I set the phone down. I looked at the cup of coffee in front of me and reminded myself to breathe more slowly. I wasn't fearless. I was terrified. I was afraid of hurting my child, afraid of losing contact, afraid that I had gone too far. But I also knew I wasn't ready to go back. If I called now, everything would return to the way it was. I would explain again, give in again, convince myself once more that this time would be the last. I finished the slice of toast. I washed the cup. I did tiny, very familiar things. And in the strange calm of that morning, I understood that last night's decision hadn't ended anything. It had only just begun. Near noon, just after I finished washing the dishes and was drying my hands on the old towel hanging by the sink, my phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't a familiar number. I looked at the screen for a few seconds before answering. The man's voice on the other end was low and clear. He gave his name and title, speaking slowly, as if accustomed to such calls. He informed me that my son and his wife were being held for questioning because they had not fully paid their hotel charges. He said the situation had been officially documented. He said it could drag on if it wasn't resolved. Then he read out a number. It was higher than the amount my son had mentioned earlier that morning. I didn't ask why it was different. I didn't ask for details. I just listened. My hand trembled slightly. I tightened my grip on the phone so I wouldn't drop it. I could feel my heart beating faster, yet my mind was clear. I understood precisely what kind of answer they were waiting for. The man asked whether I could transfer the money immediately. He didn't threaten me. He didn't raise his voice. But the pressure was in every word, in the way he emphasized time, procedures. I took a deep breath before responding. When I spoke, my voice was steady, slow, and no louder than usual. My son is an adult. He is responsible for his own decisions. I will not pay. There was a brief pause on the other end. He said he understood and would proceed according to regulations. I said I understood as well. There was no argument. No back and forth. The call ended cleanly. I set the phone down on the table. My hands were still shaking. But within that trembling, I realized something. Even with fear and worry, my decision remained firm. And this time, I did not step back. After that call, I didn't take any action immediately. I stood still in the middle of the living room, looking around the familiar apartment as if I had just walked into someone else's home. Then I went into the bedroom and opened the innermost closet door. On the top shelf sat an old cardboard box, its brown color faded by time. I pulled it down, placed it on the bed, and sat beside it. Inside were documents, not neatly organized, just things I had kept, just in case. I opened the lid very slowly. The first paper was a copy related to the wedding. I remembered that day, the brightly lit room and myself standing on the sidelines, saying it was fine. The following papers were the house purchase documents. I remembered the urgent call, the fear of my child losing the opportunity, the evening I spent alone, calculating line by line. Then came other receipts. I could no longer recall exact dates. Only the familiar feelings attached to each page, sometimes tension, sometimes exhaustion, sometimes telling myself it just needed to get through this one time. I turned each sheet slowly, as if every turn was an act of acknowledgement. I took out a pen and began adding the numbers. I didn't rush. I didn't stop. When the final figure appeared, I had to sit still for a moment. Not because I hadn't known I had given a lot, but because this was the first time I had seen it all in one place. No separation, no excuses. I didn't cry. I was simply stunned. I could see clearly how, over the years, I had slowly disappeared. Every time I said it was okay, I took a step back. I had lived my role so completely that I forgot who I was. The box lay quietly on the bed, but the truth had already been opened. I put the cardboard box back on the closet shelf. When I stepped into the living room, the apartment was so quiet that I could clearly hear the wall clock ticking, one beat at a time. I sat down at the table, stared at my phone for a long moment, then picked it up and dialed the bank number printed on the back of the card. The automated voice came on, slow and even. I pressed each button, waiting for a real person to answer. When the representative said hello, I introduced myself by giving my name. My voice sounded normal, steadier than I expected. I asked to cancel the secondary card issued in my son's name. The person on the other end paused for a second to confirm. They repeated the information. They asked if I was sure. I didn't answer right away. In my mind, I saw my son's face as a child. When he held my hand crossing the street, when he called me in the middle of the night whenever he was in trouble. I hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then I said yes. After that, I asked to stop the recurring transfers. The representative explained that once stopped, all future transactions would no longer be valid. I said I understood. The conversation was brief. No emotion, no advice, no judgment. When the call ended, I set the phone down on the table. I didn't feel relieved right away. I didn't feel regret either. I just sat there. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't open the window. I didn't do anything else. There was no applause for that decision. No one knew. No one praised it. There was only me in the familiar room, surrounded by silence. But in that silence, I understood that for the first time in many years, I had chosen myself, even if only quietly. That afternoon, I heard loud knocking at the door. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. I recognized that knock, fast, insistent, carrying irritation that hadn't yet cooled. I stood up slowly, walked to the door, and opened it. My son stood before me. His face was tight, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Behind him was his wife, clutching her handbag, lips pressed together. No one greeted me. No one asked how I was doing. My daughter-in-law stepped in first, looking around the apartment as if evaluating something both familiar and irritating. My son spoke first. His voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy. He talked about what had happened, about the long night at the hotel, about being held there, about the feeling of being stared at. He said it was humiliating. Then he turned to me and asked why I had done that. My daughter-in-law didn't wait for her turn. She spoke quickly, her voice high, her blame unmistakable. She said I had gone too far. Family matters should be handled within the family, that I had made everything worse, that I hadn't thought about them. She spoke at length, without pausing, as if she had been holding those words in for a long time. I stood there and listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I simply listened. When they finished, the room fell into a brief silence. My son looked at me, waiting. Perhaps he thought I would explain, or apologize, or at least say something to smooth things over. I did none of those things. I turned and walked into the bedroom. I took the cardboard box from the shelf in the closet. When I returned to the living room, both of them were silent. I placed the box on the table, right between us. I opened the lid and took out the first paper. "This is the document related to your wedding." I set it on the table without looking at them and took out the second paper. "This is the house purchase paperwork." I placed it down, then the third, then the fourth. I didn't read them aloud. I didn't explain. I simply laid each page out slowly, clearly enough for them to see. My son stepped closer to the table. He bent down and looked at the papers. At first, his face was still tense. Then gradually, I saw his expression change. It was no longer anger. It was confusion, surprise. Perhaps for the first time, he was seeing all of this together. My daughter-in-law remained standing farther back. She crossed her arms, her expression displeased. She said those things were in the past, that I had given willingly, that no one had forced me. She said if I had chosen to do it, I shouldn't bring it up now. I looked at her. My voice stayed low, but clear. I'm not saying anyone forced me. I'm just showing you the truth. The room fell silent, again. I didn't say anything more. I let that silence stretch. My son picked up one of the papers and read it more carefully. He swallowed. He set it back down and looked at me. For the first time since he arrived, his eyes no longer carried blame. He looked at me as if he were trying to understand. You never told me you were struggling like this. I nodded and answered briefly, because I always said I was fine. My daughter-in-law shook her head and exhaled sharply. She said families help each other, that it was normal, that a mother helping her children was only natural. She said I was making too big a deal out of it. I looked at my son. I didn't argue with my daughter-in-law. I spoke slowly. Helping each other doesn't mean one person gives endlessly while the other only takes. A family isn't a place where one person has to disappear so others can live comfortably. My son sat down in a chair, his shoulders slumped. He didn't speak for a long time. My daughter-in-law looked at him, then at me, clearly unhappy, but she stayed silent. I didn't continue listing things. I didn't mention the total amount. I didn't need to. The papers lying there had said enough. I added only one more sentence. I love you both, but love can't flow in only one direction. Without respect, it's no longer truly a family. No one responded right away. My son lowered his head. I saw him raise a hand to his face, rubbing his forehead. My daughter-in-law turned away, looking out the window. The silence lasted longer, heavier, but it was no longer as tense as before. It felt like a pause that everyone was forced to face. Finally, my son spoke in a very soft voice. He said he had never thought things were like this. He said he had always thought I was strong, always able to manage. He didn't apologize right away, but his voice had changed. My daughter-in-law said nothing more. She stood up and said they needed time. She didn't look at me when she said it. I nodded. When they left, the apartment grew quiet again. The cardboard box was still on the table. I didn't rush to put it away. I sat down and let out a slow breath. I didn't feel like I had won. I didn't feel like I had lost. I only knew that for the first time, I had said what needed to be said. And whether they accepted it or not, the truth had been placed on the table. That evening, after the apartment had grown quiet again, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. I didn't turn on the leading light. Only the small one under the cabinet cast a soft glow. I was washing dishes when my phone vibrated. This time, my granddaughter's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Her voice was very different from her parents'. Slow, soft, careful. She didn't immediately talk about what had happened. She asked if I was tired, asked if I had eaten dinner, asked if I was alone. Simple questions, but they made me stop and think. She said she had heard her parents arguing all afternoon. She said she didn't know whose side to take, but she knew one thing, that I had been sad for a long time. She apologized for not noticing before, apologized for the times she had only called me when she needed money for books or school expenses. She said she had thought that was normal. I didn't interrupt her. I let her finish. I could hear her voice trembling. I knew she was trying to say things that weren't easy. When she stopped, I told her I wasn't angry with her. I said I understood that people get used to things that have existed for too long. I told her that her calling me tonight, just to ask if I was okay, meant a great deal. She was silent for a moment, then said she didn't want things to go back to the way they were. She said that, if possible, she wanted me to know that I mattered far more than the family had ever shown. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. I told her that forgiveness wasn't a sign of weakness. Forgiveness wasn't ignoring everything and continuing to endure. Forgiveness was being clear enough to give others a chance to change, if they genuinely wanted to. She said she wanted to change. She wanted to learn how to care more. Not out of obligation, but out of affection. I believed her, not because she promised, but because of how she listened. When the call ended, I set the phone down and sat still for a while. In that quiet moment, I realized that even though some relationships had caused me pain, there were still genuine connections waiting to be nurtured. And that was enough for me to keep moving forward without feeling like I was alone. After the call with my granddaughter, I sat for a long time, doing nothing. I didn't think deeply. I didn't analyze. I just sat still. For the first time in many years, I didn't feel the need to respond immediately to anything. And in that quiet space, a straightforward thought appeared. I wanted to go somewhere, just a little farther away. Not to run away, but to be in a place where no one knew who I was, where no one needed me to fix anything. I didn't tell anyone right away. I opened my old computer and slowly searched for a short trip, not too crowded, not too noisy, just enough to change my surroundings. When I clicked confirm, my hand paused for a second. An old habit surfaced, that maybe I should wait, that perhaps in a few days my son would need me again. But this time, I didn't listen. I clicked confirm, and that was enough. I took that trip alone. No one saw me off. No one asked if I would feel lonely. I pulled my small suitcase out of the familiar apartment, locked the door, and noticed a strange sense of lightness, as if I had just allowed myself to do something without needing a reason. There, I met people who were not strangers in the usual way. They didn't know my name beforehand. They didn't know my story. But after just a few sentences, I knew we were alike in one significant way. There was a woman named Linda, about the same age as me. She had spent her entire life caring for an ill husband and 2 children. When her husband passed away and her children built families of their own, she didn't know what was left of herself. She said the most challenging part wasn't loneliness, but the feeling that no one needed her anymore. Another was George, a few years older than me. He had worked nonstop for 40 years. When he retired, he felt a sense of loss. No one called. No one needed his advice. He said he was learning how to live again without proving his worth by helping others. We didn't share details. We didn't need to. A few words were enough to understand. No one asked about anyone's past. No one offered advice. There were only slow nods and comfortable silences. One morning, I woke earlier than usual. I made coffee and sat alone in a quiet corner. The sunlight rose very slowly. There was no phone ringing, no notifications. No one is waiting for me to respond. I looked into my cup and watched the steam rise gently. And for the first time in a very long while, I asked myself a simple question. Ruth, how are you living? That question stopped me, because I realized I had never asked myself that before. I had only asked whether my child was okay, whether my family needed anything. As for me, I had never made room for that question. In that moment, I saw clearly that I was not only a mother, but also a person, not only someone who always stood behind others. I was a person with unspoken exhaustion, with desires that had been postponed for far too long, and I felt compassion for myself, not in a weak way, but in a clear, conscious way. I didn't completely change after that trip. I didn't become someone else. But I returned with something significant. I remembered who I was when I wasn't solving problems for anyone. And that memory, that feeling, I knew I needed to hold on to, because if I forgot it again, I might not have enough time left to find it once more. When I returned home after the trip, everything was still there. The small apartment, the familiar chair, the wall clock is ticking steadily. Nothing significant had changed. But I had. In the first few days, my son didn't call. I didn't call first either. Not out of anger, but because we both needed time to adjust to a new state. One without urgent calls, without conversations revolving only around money. Then one afternoon he sent a message. Just a short line. "You're back, Mom? Are you tired?" I read it several times. There was no request, no pressure, just a question. I replied that I was fine, and that was enough for that day. The changes came very slowly. There were no long apologies, no grand promises, but there were small things. He began calling at regular hours, not late at night. He asked whether I had eaten. Sometimes he talked about a tiring workday, then waited quietly for my response, without interrupting, without rushing. My daughter-in-law still kept her distance. I could feel it. She spoke politely but cautiously, not warm, but no longer harsh as before. I didn't push. I understood that not everyone changes at the same time, and not every relationship needs to return to what it once was. One weekend evening, my son called. He asked if I was free. He said he wanted to invite me to dinner at his place. He said he would cook. His voice hesitated slightly, as if he were afraid I might say no. I agreed. That dinner wasn't perfect. The food was a bit salty. There were moments of silence, but no one tried to fill the silence with blame or demands. My granddaughter talked about school. My son listened. My daughter-in-law joined in occasionally. I sat there not as someone who had to fix things, but as someone who had been invited. No one brought up the past. No one asked me for anything, and I didn't need to prove anything either. When I left, my son walked me to the door. He thanked me for coming. That was all. Nothing more. But in his voice, I heard a respect I hadn't noticed before. My family is still not perfect. Some wounds haven't fully healed. Some distances remain. But it is a real family now, no longer built on silent endurance, no longer dependent on one person sacrificing everything. And for me, that is enough to go on. Now that everything is settled, I no longer see my family the way I once did. I still believe family is the most essential thing in a person's life. But I also understand that a family cannot survive if only one person keeps yielding, enduring, and slowly disappearing. Love is not erasing yourself. Being a mother does not mean unlimited sacrifice. No one has the right to use the name of a family to force someone else to pay with their life. It took me many years to understand that, and the cost of that realization was not small. I also came to see that older people don't need pity. They need respect, to be asked about, to be listened to be seen as human beings with feelings, limits, and the right to say no. When respect is present, love finally has a solid foundation. Forgiveness, to me now, is no longer about returning to the starting point. Forgiveness is not forgetting everything that happened. True forgiveness is keeping what is worthy, letting go of what causes harm, and setting clear boundaries so old mistakes are not repeated. Not everyone will change. Some people change only when they are forced to face consequences. Some need a very long time, and some relationships cannot be saved. I accept all of those possibilities, but I believe one thing for sure. Every healthy change begins with boundaries, with the moment someone dares to say that their own life also has value. My story doesn't end with a miracle. It ends with peace, a peace that comes from no longer having to prove anything. I simply live, slowly, honestly, and fully, in my own way.